All right, well, thank you. I'm Brian. I'm excited to be here today. I'll be honest, I'm nervous too. I always like wearing suit coats because you can't usually tell how much someone is sweating underneath. So I'm here today talking you through my dissertation proposal, which is titled Antecedents to Taxpayer Compliance, Essays Exploring the Influence of Personality in Culture. So before I start, I do want to do the thank yous. So definitely to my committee, so Praveen, Max, and Addie, thank you so much for helping me get to this point. Adding to my nervousness today, I actually have my wife and my mom in the room, which I've been teaching for a while. I've been in public accounting for a while. This is actually the first time that either of them have heard me speak. So interesting. And then we have a couple other fellow faculty members that have helped get me to this point. So thank you very much. I'm excited to be here and hope for a fun conversation as we go through this. So to start off, just a quick agenda. So the plan for today, I'm going to walk you through kind of the introduction and motivation that brought me to these two topics. From there, I'm going to present the research questions. And then we're going to get into spending some time on essay number 1 and essay number 2. We're going to talk about the review of the literature that brought on both of these essays, go through the models and the hypotheses that each one bring forward, and then spend a lot of time on the methods as to where this proposal is asking that we go. After we get through both essays, we'll open it up for questions, comments, and I'll also highlight the contributions that I think both of these essays bring forward, which I'm very excited about. So, to get started, here's my motivation. So, many of you know, but many of you don't. I've spent most of my career in public accounting, and in that career I spent a lot of time doing tax work, working with individuals. So, over the past 20 years, when I would sit at my desk as a tax professional, I always found it interesting when people would come to me and say, "Yep, I am being honest. This is exactly what it is." Now, in the world of tax, we ask for supporting documents and stuff like that, but I've always kind of had that question, is this person being honest? Or to say another way, are there things out there that maybe as a tax preparer I could be looking for to know as far as people that are being honest or being compliant and those that aren't? Okay? As I dug into some of the literature, both academic and practitioner, there's something that we refer to as the tax gap. So the tax gap is really the difference in taxes of what people are supposed to be paying and what they are paying on a timely and voluntary basis. Okay? The most recently reported number is around $280 billion is the gap between what's supposed to be paid and what is being paid. Okay? Now, to put that in context, our deficit in the United States of a budget for the next year is just over $500 billion. So this tax gap, now I think it's a little optimistic to say we can get it down to zero. What you can see is that's a significant portion of the U.S. budget deficit. If we go outside the United States and we look at the damage that's occurring because of tax noncompliance, in the United States, that 285 for individuals, it expands up if we bring in other types of taxpayers. It's around 0.5% of gross domestic product. If we go into other countries like Mexico, Turkey, for example, we get up into 6.5% of gross domestic product. So when I combine my past experiences of what does a non-compliant taxpayer maybe look like, how can we profile that, and I coupled it with the damage that's happening because of tax noncompliance, really got me excited and wanted me to keep going. So that's really the motivation that brings me here today talking about this proposal. As I got digging more, I put this little fake picture in my head. Is if we had a bunch of people outside of the Internal Revenue Service getting ready for audit, now it doesn't actually work quite like that, but would there be certain profiling characteristics that may give us some indication as to a compliant versus non-compliant taxpayer? So again, taking the combination of my professional experience and these thoughts, I started digging into the literature. And as I dug into the literature, there were two big pieces that I felt there was a need for added research. One of those relates to personality, the other one relates to the national cultural dimensions and the influence that those have. So that brings me to the two research questions that this proposal hopes to answer. So the first one is essay number 1, how are personality traits related to individual taxpayer compliance intentions? And then our second essay is, does national culture moderate the relationship between individual determinants and taxpayer compliance intentions? So those are the two research questions that I bring forward that we're going to talk through today. Now, I'm going to do my best to keep this as lively, as interactive as possible. In the rare event you do happen to fall asleep, which please don't do that, I have tried to give you a little indication of what point we are at in this proposal so you can stay on track, especially if you have questions that you want to relate back to as we go through. Okay, so first essay. Again, this is the essay that's investigating the Big Five personality traits in individual taxpayer compliance. So where I started on that is digging through some of the past literature. Okay, so as I dug through literature, I've already talked about the tax gap that's out there. Now, if you go back in time to the 60s, 70s, that gap has continued to increase, so to getting up to that $285 billion that we're at nowadays. Second line up there is demographic predictors. So in the world of tax compliance literature, there's quite a bit of research as to gender, age, income level, education level, other things like that that we would call demographic predictors, and I've listed two of the bigger literature reviews over the last 30 years that really pull that together. Moving forward in time, past the demographic pieces, we get into moral components or tax morale, which basically the greater understanding you have as to where tax dollars go, your own moral internal beliefs, the more likely you are to be a compliant taxpayer. And that's somewhat logical. How that would work. Again, moving through time as we get down to Alm et al. There in 2011, ethical influences. And again, I don't think this would be a surprise to you. Ethical individuals are probably more likely to be tax compliant. Again, very believable. And then we get into some of the more recent literature stream that we're seeing is social norms. You know, the community, how does the community influence your family? How does the family influence your spouse? How does the spouse influence you? And therefore, what do you do on your tax return? Okay, so all these pieces together are kind of what's out there as to literature. But as I kept going, there wasn't a lot on personality. Okay, so McRae and Costa, that's one of the citations there. Their work goes back before that. I've just listed probably that's one of the books that they wrote that talks about the Big Five personality traits. So we have extroversion, emotional stability, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. So as I got into this personality, I really found it interesting, first off. And it really got me into thinking, going back to that professional experience, it's interesting when a taxpayer would come to me, you know, you'd assess their personality, see how they react, and I'd go, you know, I bet they're not being honest. And I had no proof to back that up, and that's kind of what brought me to this. And as I got into some of the research moving outside of tax compliance, personality has been shown to be a predictor of many things, okay? So anyways, I'll keep moving along. But it's been shown in other areas to be a predictor of many things. Taggart-Parkinson showed that personality is a predisposition to behave systematically. If you've ever filed a tax return, there's a system to that. You take stuff, you put it on there, you pay your tax. So when I got into this system, again, I just get more and more excited about personality and the possible relationship with taxpayer compliance intentions. So as I moved forward in the research, it brought me to Turner 2014. So Turner 2014 was an article about the Big Five personality traits in white-collar crime. Great article. I really enjoyed it, read well. But where it failed, in my opinion, is it took tax compliance and it included in the big umbrella of white-collar crime. So embezzlement, fraud, those types of things. And where I struggle is not everybody has the opportunity to embezzle. Not everybody has the ability to commit big frauds. But as we're all taxpayers, especially within the United States context, we all have the ability to file a tax return. And I said, you know, there's got to be differences. There's got to be. And that's really the background to this first essay. So what I've presented up there is the model, a somewhat simple model, taking the Big Five traits on the left-hand side, my dependent variable on the right-hand side, tax compliance intentions. And then what I'm doing is, based upon the review of the literature and some of those 5 bullet points that I talked through, I'm trying to control for everything else that has been shown to have a relationship with taxpayer compliance intentions. And again, to bring back that research question, how are personality traits related to individual taxpayer compliance intentions? So that's the model. And what I'm going to do here is I put together a table just to kind of get us on the same page of the big 5 personality traits. So if you look along the left-hand side, I've listed the 5 factors, and then I've listed what would be deemed a lower score and a higher score. Now, since the slide's up here, we can read. I don't want to waste time going through all of this because I'm very excited to get into some of the methods that this first paper is going to go through. But just to make sure you're reading this properly. So, for example, the first factor is extroversion versus introversion. So a higher scoring person on this personality trait is going to show signs of being assertive, active, sociable, and talkative. On the lower side, we're going to be what we would call an introvert, which is going to be more reserved, even-paced, and independent. So this goes through as we get into emotional stability, agreeableness, conscientiousness, open to experiences. We have this scale, high score, low score. Okay? So what I'm going to do now is we're going to get into the different hypotheses that this study brings forward. And somewhat logical, there's 5 personality traits in the big 5 factor model, and we're going to have 5 hypotheses brought forward in this study. So the first one is, you read it, higher levels of extroversion in taxpayers will be associated with a higher likelihood to engage in tax noncompliance. Now, as you probably picked up from the early slide, I'm more of a picture fan. Okay, so I've tried to simplify this into a picture situation. So on the right-hand side, we have the extrovert, so the assertive, the outgoing that we had talked about from that table. On the left-hand side, we have the introvert. So based upon past literature and what this study is bringing forward, our hypothesis is that the extrovert is going to be more non-compliant in regards to taxpayer compliance intentions. The second hypothesis talks through emotional stability. So emotional stability is on one side of the spectrum, being neurotic or neuroticism would be on the other side. And again, I'm going to show that graphically. You can read the hypothesis if you want to, but I think the illustration really gets it delivered pretty quick, and I think is somewhat believable. Okay, so what we get into on this one, on the left-hand side we have emotionally stable, or a person that's more stable. The belief is that individual is going to be more non-compliant. Okay, that's the hypothesis that I bring forward. And the belief is that individuals that are more neurotic, that are more unstable, that are more stressed, that are more agitated, they're already in a point of confusion. So to add something to the plate as far as choosing an unethical choice of being non-compliant isn't believable. So where we're going in this is that being emotionally stable, those individuals are in a place of comfort where to make that decision to be non-compliant is an easier decision to make. Third hypothesis is agreeableness. So again, with the illustration, on the right-hand side we have agreeable, on the left-hand side we have critical. Okay, so this agreeableness personality trait, individuals that are more agreeable, they follow rules, that type of stuff, again, they're more likely to be compliant. I think this hypothesis is somewhat logical, that agreeable individuals are more likely to behave in a compliant manner. Fourth hypothesis goes into conscientiousness. Right-hand side, we have responsible. Left-hand side, we have self-indulgent. Again, I think this is another logical hypothesis that a responsible individual is going to do the moral duty of paying taxes. They're going to be compliant. They're going to do so in a proper manner. And fifth hypothesis, the illustration at the bottom, we have non-conforming on the right-hand side, conforming on the left-hand side. Non-conforming individuals, so those that score higher on this openness to experience scale, are going to be more likely to engage in taxpayer non-compliance. So here's just a quick summary that I put together of the direction of the hypothesis that I've posited. And this is more so in case we need to refer back to it at any comment section or questions later. And to me, this is a neat slide where, assuming today goes well, that I can come back at some point and show the findings of this study. So that's what that one's there for. So here's the methods. I'm really excited about this. So in addition to personality being a gap in the tax compliance literature, another gap that's out there is typically how tax compliance is measured. A lot of studies pick a single item measure. So for example, you drove 1,000 business miles last year. How many are you going to put on your tax return? Okay? So that does a great job for taxpayers that are in that situation as to driving miles, but where we miss a little bit is some other pieces. So what this study is going to do, so I'll take a step back. First, I'm going to go Amazon Mechanical Turk on this. Sample size of 300. This is the exciting part. So instead of using a single item measure, what I've developed for this first essay is a short story that actually brings together 6 different decisions that a taxpayer might have to make. Okay? What's unique about these 6 different pieces is that any taxpayer could actually fall under this situation. A lot of the past research has put together situations that not every taxpayer could be in. So, for example, how much would you donate to charity? Well, that's great how much you would donate to charity, but only certain taxpayers are able to deduct charitable contributions. So I've been very specific in pulling together tax decisions that any taxpayer could be in. So I have 2 related to income, 2 related to deductions, and 2 related to credits. In addition to this new measure that we're bringing forward, we're also gathering some information on taxpayer knowledge. So I'm going at it from 2 angles. I'm asking for a self-report as to how well they think they know tax law. And then I've also created an additive index. So it's a 14-point questionnaire that's tied into the survey to really see how well do they know the law. Part of where this essay is going to contribute is not just understanding personality, but also to provide a contribution as to, is the non-compliance because of lack of knowledge, or is it being done with intent? And these measures are going to help capture that. Finally, we capture quite a bit of other questions as to political affiliation, fairness, types of things like that. And if you want to see the questions later, I have those in an appendix to this PowerPoint that we could talk through. So the start to this is there's a short story or a vignette put forward that brings Jesse, our gender-neutral taxpayer, and just creates a little situation. So Jesse is a graphic designer. They've moved to a new town, or she has moved to a new town. She performs some side jobs for cash. They've been lucky at the casino, and Jesse also has recently enrolled in a local community college. So what I've put up here, this is the start to the survey that will be put out on MTurk. So each of the lines represents a piece to this vignette. The first one is just the base. So Jesse is a graphic designer, a typical W-2 employee where they're paid a paycheck with taxes taken out. That's the first line. And then we get into the 6 different decisions that I had talked about. So there's a decision as to side design income, so that cash that they receive for doing the graphic design work on the side. Part B are expenses related to that side design income. Part C relates to Jesse's luck in the casino of gambling winnings. Part D is moving expenses when they move to get to the new job. Then we have these tuition costs. So to set the picture of this, to give a little more detail, Jesse went to school, but in the story, Jesse was reimbursed by his or her employer, which creates a little tax dilemma because Jesse didn't actually pay for college. What am I going to put on my tax return? And then the final one are home improvement costs. So this is presented in the survey, followed which each of the pieces of the vignette are broken out and ask specifically on an 11-point Likert scale, what decision would they make? So I've only included one of them up here as an example, but that side design income, how much would they report? Okay, now, unless any of you are on a Mechanical Turk, you're probably not going to take my survey. The right answer here is to report all of it. Okay? Going deeper in the methods, so if you remember back to that research questions, it's what's the relationship with the big 5 personality traits? So to capture that, I'm going with a mini international personality item pool measure. So this is a 20-point measure. So we have the 5 personality factors. There's 4 factors per personality trait. That has been shown in past to show proper validity and that type of stuff. Now, the full measure of personality is a 50-item measure. That would be Goldberg's measure. But with all the other pieces I'm trying to capture, it seemed that that was just too much questions. So we've scaled back and we've used this 20-item measure, which we've done a small pilot study. The 4 factors per is loading properly, and we're excited about the results, what that's going to deliver. And the way it works, very similar to the 50-item measure, is there's 20 statements that are presented, and the respondent is asked on a 5-point Likert scale to score whether they strongly agree or strongly disagree in that range. So, for example, I am the life of the party. They will respond to that. And based upon the loading of the factors, we're able to capture each of those 5 personality traits. In addition to capturing personality and capturing their tax compliance intentions with that small vignette, we're also controlling for some of the traditional control variables. So we have age, gender, income level, education level, fairness, employment status, philosophy of political beliefs, risk, tax preparation methods, tax law knowledge. So a lot of pieces that are out there, lot of opportunities for publication, even beyond just looking at personality traits as to knowledge, what taxpayers are doing. So very excited. I hope that's coming across in my voice on this one. I'm actually very excited on both these essays, but essay number 1 with the unique measure we're doing, really excited to see where that's going to go. Okay? So that brings us to the end of essay number 1. So essay number 1, as you had heard, was a survey, gathering our own data. Essay number 2 is going to go a slightly different direction. So essay number 2 is going to use secondary data, and we'll get into that more in the methods section. But where we're going after on this, essay number 2 is profiling a compliant taxpayer across nations, investigating the moderating role of national culture. So going back a couple slides, when I got started into reading on personality, personality and culture are very closely related. So personality really is when we get down to that individual level. And if we step back up to the national level, some of the same measures are what we're going to refer to as culture. So if we look at the overarching umbrella of this dissertation, that's kind of the glue that's the common thread that brings this all together. And adding on that the ability to profile taxpayers. Okay, so as we get into the second essay, I've put together some of the key pieces of literature that support international research on tax compliance. So earlier in essay number 1, I talked to pretty much purely United States focus as to demographic predictors and those types of things. So the literature I presented up on this slide relates to more of an international focus. Okay. Or just more theoretical focus, if you will. So to start, I've listed the main theories that we see in tax compliance. Now, these have evolved over time, and they're by no means silos. So by that, what I'm saying is when we look at tax compliance, it's hard to fit something just in one because there's so many pieces that are going on there. But to give a framework, so the first one is some of the older dating research on tax compliance, which is general deterrence, which is basically if you get caught and you're going to go to jail, what's the likelihood that you're not going to comply? Okay, just how do we deter? Is it penalty? Is it threat? What is it? As time went on, that really was a tough one to measure. Because one, most people aren't going to be honest in that type of situation, but it missed a lot of pieces because it's not just going to jail or being punished in a certain manner, especially in the cross-cultural setting. There's a lot of economic factors. So beyond just pure punishment, what's the cost-benefit of being a compliant taxpayer? So the second sub-bullet point up there of economic deterrence, that's what we get into. What is the risk in dollars of not complying versus complying? And a lot of the models there are based upon the Allingham-Sanmo 1974 paper, which really just looks at income that should be reported, income that is actually reported, and then it looks at a penalty rate and a tax rate and comes up with a calculation of compliance. The issue is that model actually says that taxpayers should be really compliant because nobody would want to. The model fails to address all of the pieces. I'll just say it that way. Okay. So what happens is we bring in this why situation, and that gets us into the third sub-bullet, which is fiscal psychology. How do the social norms, those around us, How does our ethical beliefs, how about our morals, how do those pieces tie in? So again, we can't look at these silo, but if we look at those three pieces, it does try and do a pretty good job of bringing together a lot of what's involved in a taxpayer compliance situation. So if we go down to tax compliance and tax morale, the Riahi-Balku 2004, that was really one of the first pieces that looked at tax compliance in an international setting. Okay? A lot of gaps in tax research internationally. It hasn't been the most researched. Now, part of that is because there aren't a lot of measures that can apply evenly. United States, if you remember before, they do a great job with the tax gap. Internationally speaking, other countries struggle with finding an accurate measure of how we can determine taxpayer noncompliance. So this is one of the first studies that looked at that. And they really looked at the morale right. They had three pieces that they used to measure morale and the effects on taxpayer compliance. Moving forward, Richardson 2006 was the first paper that took those demographic predictors from those two literature reviews that I had told you about. They were the first piece to look at how that fits in a cross-country setting, which was a very interesting article. But that was it. It just took the demographic predictors and looked at how they varied in different settings. Going down to the national culture and tax evasion, Sukumis and Richardson, so this is the same Richardson that I just talked about, they took it a step further, and these were the first pieces that actually looked at national culture and the relationship with taxpayer compliance. Those were the first two pieces. One of the gaps in reading all of this is all they looked at was main effect form only. Now, if national culture, just culture in general, as Hofstede states, is something that exists from the time of birth on, that is really a common bond within those cultures. So as we look at some of the demographic predictors that Richardson looked at, the question that I had is, it's really not fair to say men or income is fair, because we're not looking at how that culture may moderate that relationship. And that's really where this essay is going. Now, last piece there, national culture and firm-level tax evasion, Baum-Aldred et al. That piece took national culture, looked at it in a firm-level situation. Okay, so this paper, again, underneath the same umbrella, we're only looking at individual taxpayer compliance. So that's some of the past literature. Inside that literature, some of the key things that stand out. So you got to remember, going back to the start, me sitting in my office, the goal of this paper is really profiling, or being able to come up with some observation as to the characteristics that a compliant versus non-compliant taxpayer would have. So if we look at some of the most researched characteristics, we have age, gender, income source, education, and income level. So age, older taxpayers have been shown to be more compliant. So this is in a taxpayer setting. It's also in an ethical setting. If you follow Kohlberg's theory of moral development, as we age, we move up the scale of moral development. Therefore, older taxpayers are going to be more ethical, more tax compliant. Very, very logical, very believable. Okay? Gender, research has shown that females are not only more compliant in filing taxes, but also in ethical decision-making and stuff like that. If we look in a tax compliance situation, females feel the risk of getting caught is higher, the risk of being penalized is higher, which provides some support why females are a little more compliant. The third piece, income source. So what we're getting at, to overly simplify it, self-employed individuals are more likely to be non-compliant than those that work for somebody else. Now, there's a whole research stream why that is, and it's very logical as to the reporting requirements with the government. But for the purpose of this dissertation, if you're okay with just older individuals, females, and people that have taxes withheld from their income are more likely to be compliant, we're going to be on a good foundation to move forward with. Now, the last two pieces, education and income level, research has always included those, almost always included those as control variables, but the relationship is not as defined. And there's reason for that. Education is a big thing. Are we talking taxpayer knowledge? Are we talking just knowledge in general? How do we measure education? So there's questions why those are out there. this study, as well as most, is not showing any specific relationship, but they will be included for control purposes. So as we review the literature as to national culture, this study is going to use Hofstede's framework. Okay? So there's 4 pieces. So we have masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, power distance, and individualism. Okay? So there's 4 pieces up there. Now the reason I'm only using 4, so if you know Hofstede's framework, there's actually 2 other pieces. There's long-term versus short-term orientation, and there's also indulgent versus restraint. I've excluded those because there's a paper in 2012 that tried to pull those in, and there was no significance in predictive ability of those. So to keep the model a little more parsimonious, if you will, we're only looking at those 4 for the time being. So similar to the first essay, I've included a table up here just to kind of get us on a shared level as to the different characteristics and what would be deemed a high score versus a low score. So I'll walk you through the first one, and you'll probably read as I talk. But masculinity, a lower score on the masculinity scale would be associated with balance between family and work. Fathers and mothers deal with facts and feelings. Both genders are modest and caring. A higher score would be work prevails over family. Fathers deal with facts, mothers with feelings. Men should be and women may be assertive and ambitious. So to give a little more information, if we looked at the masculinity scale, higher scoring cultures, just to give this in your mind, would be cultures such as Japan or Russia. Those are going to be 2 examples of higher scoring cultures. Lower scoring culture would be something like Sweden. Okay. Uncertainty avoidance. And some of these, even if you've never been exposed to the Hofstede framework, the words themselves do kind of put forward an indicator of what the scale is looking at. I just want to mention a couple countries just to get you in context there. So for that uncertainty avoidance, what we'd be looking at a higher score, so changing jobs is not encouraged, that could be Russia or Japan. Okay? On the lower side of things, changing jobs is accepted. We'd be looking at the United States, just as an example there. Power distance, a lower scoring national culture example would be like the United States. Higher scoring where corruption would be frequent, unequal income distribution. Examples of that could be Russia or Mexico. Okay? And then the final 4th national dimension I've listed up there is individualism. So the I side, the personal opinion is expected, care focus is self-centered. What we're going to put over there, United States would be an example there. On the we focus, we'd be looking at cultures such as Colombia, Ecuador, those types of things, just to help kind of understand where we're going. So the model, again, somewhat simple, but a lot going on up there. On the left-hand side, we have age, gender, income source. And what this paper is going after, the gap that remains in current literature, is how do these national culture dimensions moderate the relationship between these profiling characteristics and taxpayer compliance intentions. So model up there shows that graphically, and again, just to remind you, the research question that the second essay is going after is, does national culture moderate the relationship between individual determinants and taxpayer compliance intentions? Okay. So each of these, if you saw the model, you can see what's about to happen, is we're going to have 3 hypotheses related to each of those 4 cultural dimensions. So I've listed them up there. I like graphics, so if we need to come back to these at the end when we get to the comment question, we will. But what I'm going to do is just show it graphically because I think it paints the picture very clearly. All right? So this is for the masculinity culture dimension. So that's the first one. On the left-hand side, I've listed the taxpayer intentions. So at the top of the scale, we have non-compliance. At the bottom, we have compliance. Our bottom axis, we have low masculinity, high masculinity. So I've got, hit the wrong button, sorry. As I've got there, we've got the lines that are showing what's kind of happened as we switch from that low masculinity to the high masculinity national culture. So again, we have our young taxpayer, that's male, that's self-employed, just to put it graphically. They are already higher on the spectrum of non-compliance. On the low end, the more compliant taxpayer, we have our older taxpayer, female, that has taxes withheld from their earnings. So if we look at this illustration, what we're saying is as we shift from cultures of low masculinity to high masculinity, the compliance of these more compliant taxpayers is going to decrease. Or to say it another way, masculinity is moderating the relationship of age, income source, and gender. Sorry. So that's the graphic one. Now to keep moving forward so we can get into methods and really give that adequate time without putting you to sleep, I'm going to go somewhat quick through the next two, because the framework or the idea or what research supports behind this is somewhat similar. Okay? So our next dimension, we have uncertainty avoidance. So those are going to be the three hypotheses that SA2 brings forward related to uncertainty avoidance. Graphically, same thing. We have low uncertainty avoidance, high uncertainty avoidance. And I know some people don't like pictures, so I took them out here, didn't want to do it. So we again, same thing. The non-compliant taxpayers, we have the younger male, self-employed. More compliant, we have older female that are employees. Uncertainty avoidance is going to moderate. Okay. Now, if you look at past research, and I probably should have said more of this in the masculinity culture dimension, past research shows that cultures that are higher in uncertainty avoidance are more prone to bribery, are more prone to corruption, and stuff like that. Okay. So a lot of this, especially if you're new to the Hofstede framework, you read on this uncertainty avoidance and you go, well, gosh, I would never want to cheat on my taxes because I want to avoid the uncertainty of getting caught. And that's not really the buildup of literature doesn't support that. So in regards to uncertainty avoidance, what would be more common is I'm late, so I'm going to speed so I'm not late. Okay? Or I'm afraid that someone's going to upset me, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to push them or hit them to avoid that. So as we think about some of these, especially like older taxpayers as an example, older taxpayers, typically more health care, more retirement, maybe paying for tuition. We have these uncertainties out there. So if we look at this dimension, part of what we've built up on past research is the belief that that taxpayer may actually be more likely in these high uncertainty avoidance cultures to engage in non-compliance. All right. Going into the third national culture, we have power distance. Those are the three hypotheses. And then to show them graphically, again, on the left-hand side, we have intentions. On the bottom, we're showing the low versus high power distance. Our non-compliant taxpayers being younger male self-employed. At the bottom, we have older female employees. So again, we're saying is as we shift into these high power distance cultures, the moderating effect will be that these more compliant taxpayers will actually be more likely to engage in non-compliance. So examples of cultures that would be more high power distance would be like Russia and Mexico. Okay? So when we get into power distance, it's not so much the distance of power, but we're talking about the acceptance, if you will. Okay? That it's okay that we have this gap. So when we get into that, past research has shown that these high power distance cultures, unethical activity is actually not even maybe viewed as unethical. It's just kind of part of the culture. So as we shift, as we look at this moderating effect of power distance, as we move into those cultures where bribery is maybe more accepted, corruption, we get into the idea that taxpayer noncompliance would also be more accepted, causing that moderating effect. Okay. Moving into the fourth dimension of individualism. So this one's going to be a little different. So if you're falling asleep, we're on SA2, you're going to see a totally different graphic here, so be ready for this. Okay? Those are our three hypotheses. Now graphically, again, we're on the individualism dimensions. So lower scoring is going to be we. It's the group, it's the clan, it's the family, the importance of that. Higher scoring is going to be the I. So same graph, but the lines are going to go in an opposite direction. So for each of the three hypotheses on this, what we're showing is we move into high individualism cultures were actually going to show more compliance. Now, what research shows on this, because this is not, if you just take at face value, it may not be as believable. I think it's believable to go, well, it's me, it's all about me, I'm going to cheat on my taxes. So cultures where that's the culture, you would expect, well, why aren't we seeing these high individualism cultures engaging in noncompliance? And what literature builds up on this is that these low individualism cultures where the focus is on the we and the family and the clan and the group, is taking care of that group is so important that you do it at whatever means necessary. Okay? So what we're seeing is those lower cultures are more likely to see noncompliance, is where literature is building us to. Now, to say it a different way, high individualism cultures are typically, they show stronger legal systems, more rigorous tax structures, those types of things, which there is a belief there also why compliance would be less. But at a foundation level, I just want to make sure you understand why we're saying that low individualism is going to see more noncompliance. So we've already walked through most of that. Okay. So again, just a graph, if we need to come back to it during the comments section or questions as to the variable we're looking at and the moderating effect of each of the national culture dimensions, less compliant, more compliant, and then the interaction effect that we're not anticipating, that the literature has brought us to, that we're looking forward to bringing forward with our methods to test to see if it's supported. So as far as methods, as I had referenced coming into this study is going to use secondary data. It is sourced from the World Values Survey, Wave 6. Okay, now, this survey, secondary data, a bunch of countries, around 100 countries, 100,000 respondents, looking at the variables that we need to pull from it in our preliminary analysis. We're going to get down to around 50,000 usable responses, which represent over 30 countries, right around 34 to be exact. And where this study's going that a lot of past research hasn't done is we're going to go with hierarchical linear modeling. Now, what this is going to allow us to do is we're going to be able to keep this data in disaggregated form. So when I talked you through the literature before, and we talked about Richardson, and we talked about Baum-Aldred, and a couple of the others, what we got into there, actually Baum-Aldred is not one, I apologize. Richardson and Sukumis and some of those other articles, what they did is they aggregated the data. So they took a lot of individual responses and they got down to samples of 30, 50, 150, very small samples. And what happened in doing so is all the individual different determinants, so that age, gender, income source, was essentially eliminated or just meaned out, which in reviewing the literature is like, well, we can't do that. And by using this alternative method of analysis, we're going to be able to keep the data in a disaggregated form, and we're going to be able to look at a multi-level of analysis, both capturing those individual determinants that are so important, while also capturing the national culture dimensions. I've thrown up there as a note, I have done some preliminary analysis both in SPSS and started to work with HLM more at the beginning of this before really getting deep in the literature. So we have done some analysis. We have seen some preliminary results. A lot more work needs to get put into it, but excited about the possibility of what this could produce. As far as the methods, so again, secondary data coming from World Values Survey. So we're using a single item measure. So our measure for tax compliance intentions is, please tell me whether you think cheating on taxes, if you have a chance, can always be justified, never be justified, or something in between. So we have the scale that's in there. And then we have our independent variables. So age, gender, income source. We're controlling for income level, education level. And we also have the cultural dimensions. Now, since it's up there, I just want to highlight in tax compliance research, if we even go back to that first study, research has used single item measures quite frequently in tax compliance research, and it's accepted in the practice that a single item measure is going to work. And since we're dealing with secondary data, that's what we're dealt, but past research has supported that appears workable. So as far as contributions, both of these, we're looking at personality and culture in a profiling sense of taxpayer compliance. So The first contribution is we're bringing in this widely used Big Five personality traits as a predictor of taxpayer compliance. It's been done in white-collar crime, but we haven't gotten to the narrow piece of taxpayer compliance, as I showed or said at the beginning. Understanding how personality could influence taxpayer compliance is very interesting when we look at the magnitude of that tax gap. Any pieces that we could find that could either help governments in auditing taxpayers in working better, tax professionals in working better with taxpayers, those types of things would all prove useful. Second thing, the second essay, we're looking at the moderating effect of various cultural dimensions on individual determinants of taxpayer compliance. So really building on that past research, we've seen that research has shown that national culture does have an influence, but taking it a step further, keeping the individual pieces of respondents and showing the importance of that, and looking at the moderating effect where how age and gender and income source change as to the compliance intentions of taxpayers as we move between cultures and look at the moderating effect that might be occurring. Finally, we provide information that can be used to better understand what causes taxpayers to comply or not comply, assessing risk as a tax professional in dealing with clients, maybe screening by government, and then decisions related to cross-cultural business. So in a tax professional setting, if I'm looking to outsource some of my preparation work, is there a better place to outsource to versus not based upon some of the research? So that brings us to the contributions. And what I think we do now is open it up for questions and comments.
Yeah, I will grab the microphone so that people can I have three questions. The first one has to do with essay number 1, where you talked about neuroticism being linked to more compliance. And when I was trying to understand the logic for that, I wasn't quite sold on it. So you were saying that if somebody is neurotic, then they would be more likely to be compliant with their taxes. And if somebody is less neurotic, because of the emotional stability, they would be more likely to be compliant. So I wasn't quite sure about the logic of the research for that. Can you extrapolate?
Can I pull out and bring it back just so? Yeah. That first part I didn't quite hear, so I apologize. Let's bring that back up. So on this one you're asking, Praveen?
Yes. I'm kind of curious, what's your logic to expect that the more neurotic someone is, the more they would comply?
What we get into, and where literature is kind of shown in other areas, is that and I'm going to paraphrase or create a little story if that helps, is that I'm so agitated with everything else, I'm so worried about situations, and I'm not stable that I'm not going to take the chance of being non-compliant. That I'm already so agitated that the likelihood that I would choose to do a deviant act of not compliant, that I'm already over the edge, if that...
Okay, and at the same time, I'm also thinking that maybe the person would be so agitated that adding something else would not matter. But I guess once we see the results, we'll see what works, The other one was with MTurk. I don't think, many people have used it yet. Can you tell us a little bit about its acceptance in research now and why you think that would work as opposed to something more traditional, such as kind of a paper and pencil survey?
Sure. So, part of it, I grabbed a couple citations. So Kassler, Beckel, and Hackett in 2013 had actually shown acceptance as far as what's coming from MTurk. And there's another in 2011, Burmeister actually showed that the MTurk sample was actually more diverse and representative. For this study, the MTurk is attractive. So I went to a conference that I presented the first paper at earlier this summer, and in the world of tax compliance, MTurk is actually becoming very popular. There were around 16 papers presented, and it was a behavioral conference, so almost everybody was doing survey data. I would say half of them were using MTurk for their sample. For this study, it works very well. MTurk respondents typically have lower income. which for me is attractive because lower income people, at least based on my professional experience, are more likely to self-prepare a tax return. Okay. In addition, lower income people, if you remember how that vignette was built, I wanted situations that worked for everybody, so it fits that. I did do a pilot study for the first essay. We gathered 50 responses just to get the questions kind of fine-tuned. And I saw that. I have a slide I can show comparison to some other research if you'd like to see it. But income was right. Of the 50 respondents, I had 32 different occupations represented. And it was unique. I didn't give this statistic, but the current estimate of taxpayer compliance based from the IRS, it's Internal Revenue Service, it's around 81.7% is the compliance rate. And over the past week, I actually took my data from that pilot study, and I looked at the compliance rate, and I had a 78% compliance rate. So I'm not saying it could just be coincidence, but it was interesting, or made me smile that the National Internal Revenue Service number is 81.7, and when I looked at the actual dollar damage from my study, it was within 3%. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I was curious because I think the fact that you've done a pilot study and it's showing some results probably supports that then. So I think that will be something that will need to be addressed. In the second essay, you talked about using Hofstede, and we talked about the literature also having a more recent kind of theoretical national culture framework, the CoBE study. Can you tell us a little bit why you decided to go with Hofstede, although it's much older and we have something newer?
Yeah, so I'm probably going to get the year wrong, so please excuse me, but I think Hofstede in 2011 actually did a study, not a study, it was more of an editorial piece that compared a lot of the dimensions in the Hofstede framework to the GLOBE study, the house study that referenced, and showed that actually even a lot of the GLOBE, even though it's a newer study, a lot of those same dimensions actually relate back to the Hofstede piece. I know, Max, I think you did a paper in 2006, I believe, also showed that the Hofstede components still have very good validity and even in current day context are still valid. And that's probably the biggest reason. In addition, building on Richardson and Sukumis that looked at national culture, they used the Hofstede framework and looking to kind of build on their research and explore the moderating effect. That would probably be another reason that I've kept it. Does that?
Yeah. And,
okay.
I'm just anticipating a review of comment, and I know that's something that comes up, so I'm good.
I know. Oh.
I think the first one is
the committee goes first, and then.
Oh.
Yeah. Thank you.
all right. So I just have one question. I think, Brian, you have done a very good job. At least you keep me awake the entire time. And then, so my question is about the second essay. And I understand you try to build your model based on the current research. So you focus only on the first four dimension of national culture dimension. And then, as you also mentioned, you recognize that there are two additional cultural dimension. One is a long-term orientation. The other one is indulgence. And then, so I think a possible future step research is to examine or explore their likely influence on the taxpayer compliance. So could you just comment, what would you think their impact on the model? That means would the long-term orientation or long-term oriented culture be more likely to be involved in tax compliance or tax non-compliance?
Sure.
That's my question.
Sure. So this is more personal belief. I don't have much literature in my head on those two. Indulgent versus restraint. Indulgent on that. Oh. We're good? The indulgent, I would assume that taxpayer, I would think there would be literature out there that showed the indulgent taxpayer would be more likely to be non-compliant. And in the long-term, short-term orientation, I would also think that the short-term orientation would be more prone to be to show if we looked at in the moderating setting even, which you're right, could be a very interesting contribution for future research. I would think the short term would also be more non-compliant.
Okay. Next one is not a question, but a comment. I think it's very interesting. The first essay touch base with Big Five personality. A second one touch base with national cultural dimension. Maybe we can also look at their relative importance. And then which of the Big Five will have a more important effect or impact on the tax compliance behavior. So that's a comment.
Okay.
Great job.
Okay. Yeah, and I probably skipped it in the methods section, but the way that first one actually works with the 6 different pieces, it creates a real-world tax dollar situation, and then the survey actually presents the respondent with the ability to modify their answer. So it's based upon real dollars. So when I gave the non-compliance that I came up with of around 22%, that was based upon, of my 50 taxpayers, if they all paid what they should have, we would have collected around $350,000 in tax revenue. That was shorted by around $70,000. So it's a real calculation. So we're also capturing likelihood that a taxpayer would switch based upon what they're presented with when they're preparing their own taxes, just to throw that in there.
Okay, so I really enjoyed your presentation, and I have one comment and one question. So the comment is, it's relating to the slide that's up there, the neurotic part. So I think one way you can defend your hypothesis is by linking the evidence that a lot of times highly neurotic individuals, they tend to be accountants. So they would be aware of, okay, they probably know how a person can not comply with taxes. So because they know that, they might think that others will also know that. And that, you could use that as a argument to further support your, hypothesis.
Yeah. No. So I use the teacher versus public accountant to my benefit. So if you did that, I'd be like, I'm a teacher. So, yeah.
And then my question is about your, so the MTurk sample.
Yes.
I don't recall, but is there a way there for you to make sure that your respondents are actually taxpayers?
So in the method of the MTurk, I narrow it to those that are only in the United States, because that first paper is only looking to generalize across the United States. I'm capturing questions in the survey as to, do you file a tax return? Do you prepare your own tax return? Those types of things, which would capture those types of things. In the 50 sample, I could tell you that everybody did file a tax return.
But you did say that, like, respondents have some kind of credibility thing that attached to.
So within the MTurk platform, you can there's an added charge to it, but the Turkers, as they complete surveys, if they haven't received a certain acceptance rate. So in the survey, there's check questions. The total survey is around 60 questions. It'll take around 15 minutes to complete. There's several check questions where if they don't hit those check questions, I can throw them out. But what happens is if a Turker gets thrown out, it goes against their rating. So in the MTurk sample that I'm going to be going after, I've U.S. and I've done, they have to be master's status, meaning I want to say 70% approval rate. Plus, I also have the check questions on top of that.
Okay.
Anybody has questions?
Thank you very much, Brian. I think your two essays, they are very interesting, great, research in my view. So I have comments and also questions here. The first one is about MTurk. First one is a comment about MTurk, and the other one you probably could consider is called Qualtrics. That platform you can also use to do the surveys, and I can send you a literature. Actually, there was one published in AMJ using MTurk. So I have a few, if you send me a note. So they will help you methodology and show the validity using the platforms. And for your essay one, when you present those big five related to the DB, I think the DB for the two essays, they are the same, right?
Correct.
Okay. So I'm thinking about your first essay. Probably you could include, some possible moderators. Probably you already thought about that. So, for example, just use your hypothesis 2, emotional stability here. I'm thinking maybe accounting knowledge of an individual. They will, overcome some kind of like neuroticism. And they could be interesting like a moderator. If you could, still have, a space to put those moderators. And also I'm thinking about like perceived penalty. And the likelihood to be caught. I don't know if there is a similar like construct out there for you to use to represent this kind of idea. That is, if I perceive this kind of violation will be caught easily, I probably would not do that.
Yeah, so through the DBA courses, there's a lot that I'm trying to get in that first one. So there are, and I'm not, you can keep going, I just wanted to add, so I do have questions as to perception that you'll get caught, that if you made this, how likely would you get caught? How likely are you subject to audit? Which already has found some interesting information. A lot of studies ask that question, but they put it on a 11-point Likert scale, like how likely are you to get caught? So a lot of studies say that people think it's a 20% chance or 30% chance, which I've always struggled with, because if you've ever done a survey, not a lot of people like to put stuff at either end. At least I don't. Nobody's that bad and nobody's that perfect. So to me, when I'm saying a 2, it's because, I don't know if it's really 20%. So in my study, we've gone with a sliding scale to do that, and we've narrowed the range a little bit. So the pilot study showed that the belief of risk of audit is closer to 9%, which is more in line. The actual rate is under 1% this year. So, but a lot of pieces. I'm actually really excited about moderating stuff and taxpayer knowledge. Are they doing it with intent, not with intent? So, right with what you're saying, I'm actually very excited about all of that.
And also, I think, would you please repeat the definition of the dependent variable called the taxpayer intentions, right?
Yep.
What's the definition?
So the studies, the intent, that if you were in that situation, what would be the intent? So it is a limitation of the study, and most tax compliance research is, just because the availability of data. We don't know if taxpayers if they were in that situation, would really cheat. Specific to the first study, because we have a little more control over that one, because it's the survey, to try and reduce that limitation, we're asking questions as to, in the last 5 years, how often have they had to make a decision related to each of those 6 pieces. We're also... So where the leap on that one is going that if your intent is that, and you've been in that situation in the last 5 years, that the likelihood that that's actually what you might have done is believable. So I'd love to say tax compliance, what their behavior is, but it's a little tougher to do. So if we scale it back to intentions, that's where we're at, and there is a little limitation there.
So you measure the dependent variable with a one-item question.
For the second study, yes.
And how about the first essay? How do you measure that?
So the first essay, the vignette presents the 6 different decisions that the taxpayer has to make. Those 6 questions are converted to actual tax dollars, and then a composite score is derived from that.
Okay.
So what we get is and again, as to the different pieces we can pull off, we can see compliances to each of the individual pieces. So I'm not saying that the pilot study will hold true when we get to the full sample, but in the pilot study, of the different pieces, we actually had an 80% non-compliance rate. Okay? Now, each of those pieces is not quite as damaging, you know. And this isn't one of the questions, but if you cheated 10 miles on your tax return, well, you still cheated. The damage is minimal. It's, you know, $2 of taxes, but the damage is minimal, but it's there, you know. So the hope of feeding back in some of the contributions of this is, are people cheating because they don't know? Is it lack of knowledge? Is it intent? What specific thing don't they know? How often have taxpayers been in that situation? To kind of close the loop and really provide some contribution both to practice and academia that can get that gap down, that $285 billion.
Okay. So I think my last question is about common method bias. So in terms of Paskov et al., JP 2003, the piece talking about 2 ways to possibly lower the possibility of the bias. So one is procedural, like a design. The second one is about statistical remedy. So how do you have any like a thing in the design process to help you lower the common method bias for your survey?
In the design, I guess we've tried to. So I know one of the methods with Paskov is, you know, bring in another variable that has shown social desirability and stuff like that, and see how it compares. We don't have that in this. I don't have that in this. You know, based upon the pilot study, if we think about social desirability and stuff like that, I don't know how many people would choose to say that they cheat on their taxes, that would be their intent. So part of the pilot study findings that helped me think that maybe the design, although we're not controlling for it statistically, is that we didn't see. You know, the questions are written in such a way that I don't think they're not there to trick. You know, it's if you read the question, it'd be, what would you do? And you know, we had an 11-point Likert scale on every one of the questions. In truthfulness, probably only 3 of the points on the Likert scale made sense. You know, the rest would be pretty obvious. You just picked an answer, for the most part. And the responses were very hit as to the 3 answers that I would expect. So as to Paskov and your question with common method, I don't specifically have something to that, but the pilot study has kind of made me feel that, especially with social desirability, is one of the pieces of common method that it may not be as big of a factor. But with any survey, it is a limitation.
I have a suggestion here. Probably you could separate your IVs and the DV and put into like 2 stages of investigation. So I don't know if that's possible when you use MTurk. So, but you probably can think about this, and the interval of the time frame for them, the same respondent to finish the 2 parts of the survey. Probably you can use like 1 week. So the first week they finish the IVs, and then after 7 days they finish the DVs. So there would be a one way.
Yeah, and in the design, I thought of it, and I'll talk with the committee on it too. I get it. You know, MTurk you can do a multiple round. It's not quite as simple, but it can still be done. And with Qualtrics and others, there's other avenues to go. Something I'll look at. Is that acceptable?
Yeah, sure.
Point? Okay.
I just give you a suggestion.
No, I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I really do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So as a management faculty member, I'm thrilled that you've got Big 5 and intentions and national culture. Congratulations on all of that. In general, Fishbein and Eisen, so intentions linked to behavior, there is a link. Is there anything in the taxpayer intentions literature that actually tries to show the link from taxpayer intentions to actual behavior? Is that out there?
There's not much, and I'm speaking, this is going back in my head just a little bit. It's stuff I've recently read, but I haven't cited it, so it's not as clear as I'd like it. There's a couple studies. Well, I should step back. In the United States, the IRS doesn't really release a lot. There's a couple studies that have gotten access to Internal Revenue Service and shown that. Other countries like Australia, their government is, from what I've read, it appears more open to some of that, where it's a very concrete, this is the behavior, not so much intentions. And there's some neat studies as to sending out letters to see how taxpayers in an actual setting, in Australia, that's the context I'm thinking, responded to those letters. So there's some out there, but it's not a lot, purely because you're talking about an illegal activity.
Right. So the comment here is, this isn't a part of your dissertation, but whatever you can do to show that there have been some links from taxpayer intentions to actual behavior, that it's credible that you and others are looking at intentions, because at least in this data that you can cite, does that make sense? That
Yes,
you
it
could
does. Yes,
show
it
that
does.
there's a link there?
Yes, it does.
All right. And then in the literature I'm familiar with the Big Five, most times there are statistically significant relationships with other variables, but they're moderate in magnitude. Is that similar to what you're finding, that the Big Five, yes, there is a relationship, but it's not a strong relationship?
So as far as the significance as to the actual significance, that is strong. The betas that I've seen in the others, which were regression with very small sample sizes, I don't remember off the top of my head. I can tell you in my disaggregated analysis in SPSS, which probably is not the best way, the betas are small. They're very small. But in the preliminary looking at HLM, where we separate the national from the individual, it doesn't appear to be quite as that small.
So no, I'm really just focusing on SA1 here.
Oh, on essay number 1?
Yeah.
I can show you what some of the preliminary showed if you'd like to see that.
No, that's all right.
Oh.
But the issue, I think,
The
is
betas
that
were actually bigger, and I only had a sample of 50, but I did still get significance on 2 of the 5.
because it's one thing to get statistical significance, but then it's the so what question. That's what you want to say. Does it really matter? Put your tax professional hat on. Is it really going to matter if there's a beta of 0.13, even if it's statistically significant? You know, those types of questions you'll want to get at.
It's a good comment. One of the ones, the emotionally stable one, when I just came up with my thought before I dug into the literature, I thought it'd be the opposite, very similar to what Praveen had said, and the pilot study wasn't showing that. Now that isn't why the hypothesis is the way it is. That's what literature led us to. But I could tell you as a practitioner, in even just knowing that little piece, now my thought is different. So maybe that I need to find more. I would think it would be interesting to. My mind's just jumping to doing a focus group. Even that if I knew this, and here's the factors, as a tax professional, would you find that useful to know?
Okay. And then back to Max's point, in the literature I track, there are differences of the big five on how much they impact, and usually it's conscientiousness that seems to have the most impact in typical work settings. This is not taxpayer, but you might want to think about if you would be expecting one or more of the big five to have an even greater impact. And that may not change your hypotheses, but you might want to look at that, because I think Max's point is there may be some relative magnitude differences of some of the big five versus the others.
And I know Max and I have talked on some of that, and I think we've kind of seen 2 big loadings on 2 specific areas. So that's not in the paper right now, but as it moves forward, something that could be. And
just because I have to ask, you're sure that you've got statistical power here for...
So what is it, Cohen 98? Am I close?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do the math myself, but I went out to the online calculators, and I'm around double to get the proper size effect. And
Thank you. I'm happy.
I had several questions, but let me see if I can remember them all. Starting with paper 1, So as I understand, you're measuring behavioral intention.
Correct.
In terms of compliance or non-compliance.
Yes.
And you're using psychological factors. But what about the full gamut of socio-psychological factors? I'm looking at attitudes and beliefs impacting intentions, your affective dimensions, your cognitive dimensions impacting intentions. And I'm looking at situations where somebody could be an introvert, but depending on their attitudes and beliefs, they may want to pay or not pay. So you're missing that whole thing of what comes from social psychology in terms of from all the way from attitudes, beliefs, all the way to your affective dimensions, cognitive dimensions, to your behavioral intentions, to your actual behavior.
Yep. I do
so that the whole, and the environment. I mean, if you want to dig deeper into that stream of literature.
So I do have questions as to fairness. So it's only in regards to the tax system, but is the tax system fair or not? If you knew you were not going to get caught, how likely would you be? So I've tried to pull in variables. A lot are sourced from previous literature that this is building on, that have tried to pull in attitude, need almost, if you will. That's not the way I've identified it in the paper, but if you had the ability, would you? How confident would you need to be that you would get away with it if you did it? So there are some pieces like that. I mean, the branch of the runway leading up to it, I agree, it's a very big runway.
You could have an attitude, I don't think the government needs this money. Yep. Or you could have the attitude, yep, I need to support something.
Right.
So your attitude and things like that could form what you want to do. And you could be an extrovert, introvert, or whatever the dimensions, and it could vary based on your beliefs, your belief systems. Your belief systems would guide your intentions.
Right.
So I didn't see the whole thing which is related to that in your dissertation. I'll come to the culture later because but I'm looking at, this is only done in the US, right? I mean, there the belief system is going to be only one. If you do the Hofstede here, you're looking at country as one dimension, individualistic to power distance being narrow and other things.
Correct.
So, but that's not being done in this essay at all. So that is one. And so I don't know whether you had an answer for that before I jump into...
So the Bobek studies are some that I would say that this is building on, is to bringing some stuff in. I've included all the variables that study had used, which is a A-star publication where that ended up. Not saying that that's justification to not add more. I'll need to look at the variables that I'm pulling in. I've tried to get political beliefs and fairness and attitude and need. I had some in there for social norms that would feed, kind of the framework there. I removed those for length reasons, but I could look at bringing those back in or making sure I capture them. Tough part is a lot of the measures that have been used in the social norm area are 4 or 5 item measures per piece in keeping the survey doable in a realistic time. Those were some that I pulled back out. But I definitely understand what you're saying.
Then in terms of when you do the actual data collection, you're giving them a situation.
Correct.
About Jesse, what should Jesse do?
Yes.
I may think Jesse should pay his taxes, but I will not pay my taxes. We always have that thing, right? Somebody else should be doing this, but that's not maybe my behavioral intention.
There is research in the tax compliance realm, and I'm not, maybe in the management side too, that does show that the story is a way to move the focus off of oneself while still getting an accurate answer as to what they would actually do if they were in that situation.
So as long as you're able to, maybe there's a correlation there in terms of, I don't know, but that was my thing. Then I think you mentioned, I haven't read the paper so I wouldn't know, but you mentioned that logically it should be related. Like you're substantiating through literature. I mean, it doesn't have to be direct, but I am quoting it from another area, but I'm just curious.
In my talk, I did, in my mind, I'm not doing enough, and I kept watching the clock, and I shouldn't have.
Uh-huh.
It is all built on literature. And really, we did the pilot study and we ran some stuff even on SA2, which I think is the one you're asking on. We ran some initial stuff, and then the statistical stuff got put away, and everything that's presented in the paper is not even looking at the statistical. It's purely built on what literature says. If that answers what you're asking.
Because you may be arguing for that in the literature, but in your papers. That's why I haven't read the paper.
Yes, and I apologize for not using the best words. Something I'll definitely.
In paper 2, you're looking at country level. I was just curious. For example, I'm going to use India as an example. The power distance are large and more a collectivistic culture than individualistic culture. But then slightly over 2% of the tax-paying base pays taxes in India. Okay, 98% of the folks don't. Meaning that the country's profile, but you already know that, okay, then you can say that, okay, maybe in a collectivistic society with a high power distance, they don't pay taxes. Will that be, but the answer is obvious there then. Or there's something else you're trying to dig deeper into, see what makes the 2% pay and 98% not pay. But of course, in the question of India, the problem is the way the system is set up. It goes into the infrastructure system and how the money and banking works and how there's a lot of other dimensions rather than the cultural dimensions. As that's why I was curious. There are other things. Why does money laundering happening? Why does, which is more than just the cultural dimensions. And if the same situation was here in the US, even with a highly individualistic culture,
right,
if only 2% will pay taxes. So that's more than what I was trying, more than the cultural dimensions, there could be something else. That was my...
Yeah, I acknowledge it. I don't have a great answer for you right now. It's something I can...
Because I'm wondering whether that may be even leading into something like an ecological fallacy in your essay 2. That was my concern there. You're looking at aggregated data, looking at two different things and making an assumption that that's what's happening.
Yeah.
And because it's secondary data.
It is. There's other variables in the world values survey that we can maybe look at. I don't know if we're going to be able to get all that out of it. But it might be something where, similar to the merging in of the Hofstede, maybe there's some other factors we can look at that would capture some of the things you're referencing as to possible reasons to control for. That's my only thought. A lot of those, so Richardson, a lot of those studies that had really small samples of the 30 and the 50 that were all aggregated, that's what they did. They pulled in shadow economy factor, and they pulled in a lot of other pieces like that we could look at. My mind's just running on ways to help reduce that, and I could talk with the committee on that.
My thoughts, concerns, and suggestions and stuff like that.
Okay, I appreciate that. And this will be recorded, so if I didn't write your comment down, it's because I will get it with the video.
Good job. Abby had a question. She has some notes. She'll give it to you later. But one of her questions was, because the taxpayer would actually benefit from cheating and the survey person would not, do you think that will have an influence on your results that you might not have counted for?
So the question is, in real life, if I cheat on my taxes, I, at least for a short time being, have the money in my pocket, where the survey taker might just, hey, let's hit the government and show we're going to cheat on everything. That's a tough one to control for. The MTurk person is getting paid. So Dr. Yu, your question on Qualtrics, really, part MTurk is I like people that are not preparing their own tax return, or actually are preparing their own tax return. That's a preference to me. It's a less expensive route, but they are getting, this survey will pay $3. It's a very good question. I don't know how to get out of that without creating some sort of game in a more isolated setting where they make a decision and there's a change of hands for they actually benefit. There could be a follow-up study, I think, that would take some of the findings and piece it more where there's a personality and then there's a experiment in a live setting as to what decision would you make.
Okay. And one thing I wasn't clear on is that, okay, your survey is going to have some questions to validate that they actually do have knowledge of compliance factors, right?
So there's two pieces. There's 3 questions that actually just ask, do you think you know the tax law? That's not the way it's written. Do you think you know it? And then I have a 14-question additive index that we've created that goes after, do you really know it?
Right.
Yeah.
And so let's just say they didn't know it out of those 14 questions.
Yes.
Doesn't that, if these guys complete the survey and they don't know the tax rules, doesn't that basically invalidate all 5 characteristics you're looking at? Because the reason they didn't comply wasn't because they were emotionally stable, it's because they didn't know the tax rule. So then, if that's true, you have to find enough sample size that do know the tax rules in order to prove your hypotheses according to your characteristics. Am I correct on that, or is there?
You're kind of correct. I'm not going to say you're not correct. I don't like to say that.
Good move.
Yeah. Sorry. I teach accounting, so I'm really good with numbers, but my words don't always come out the way I want them to. Possibly. I guess the question I would, in my mind, is do we ever get enough questions to fully say that they're a knowledgeable taxpayer? And if I purely say I'm knowledgeable, and I get enough groups that say they're knowledgeable versus I don't have a clue, and in my split of sample data, it was almost split. Those that said they knew and those admitted they had no clue. And with the power size, it was like 117 was the sample I needed with the variables I was including. The thought would be I would have enough to maybe split that, actually.
Right, but my point is that if I don't know the rules, how can I apply them correctly, even if I want to? And wouldn't my hypotheses would be that would overpower any of your questions and hypotheses, because the reason I didn't do it correctly is very likely or possibly that I didn't know the rule in the first place. It could be if I had known the rule, I still wouldn't have complied, But so do you have to segregate that out? And that's something you have to talk to your committee about. But to me, it seems like that might be something, unless you control for, by eliminating them.
That's the cognitive dimension.
Right, which, with the MTurk platform, it's quick enough to get more responses, so we can do a quick analysis to see the groups that we have as to knowledge or not knowledge. And if we need to up the sample to beyond 300, we could do that. It's a very great point.
And that's up to your committee, not me. I was just asking it because I wasn't sure when you were.
No, it's a very good point. Very good point.
Good job.
That is to show that it's not. It's if you know, but you still choose not to. So that's why it's in there. But
you're flipping the side of they don't know, so you're relating personality to something that they don't even know what they should do, and I totally get it. So I see 2 pieces. One, I'm actually capturing some very valid information as to intent versus accident. But if we can pull out the piece that those that get a certain score on that additive index as to you should know, or you do know, actually, we would be able to then, on that.
And you might be able to do some separate study on the people that didn't know, how often they're non-compliant just based on these particular areas of the tax code,
right?
Because not knowing tends to make you think some way or something. I'm not sure.
Right.
Yeah, you can actually test for differences based on
Yep.
that variable and see are there or not.
Yeah, and in the early analysis of my sample, I didn't do that, but I'm excited to see what that.
Trying to cost you more money, you know how it goes.
The classic example here in Wisconsin, you're supposed to pay sales tax on things that you bought online.
Yeah, Illinois too, yes. Yeah.
And I wonder, now Amazon did that. Before that,
Yes.
I wonder how many of us actually kept track of our order online.
I can tell you of the 600 tax returns we prepare at our firm, I'd say 1.
So sometimes people don't know.
Yeah.
They point it out to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the funny part is, as a tax preparer, are there any sales that you need to report here?
And you don't ask.
No, we do ask it. We do ask it. We're pretty we're pretty ethical firm.
Any other questions? Okay, good deal. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
guys. I really appreciate it.